I just stuck with mariachi. I had to do it. I liked it so much in that Kaiser intro that I needed to bring it back. I needed to bring it back. So let's just let that thing go for a minute. Are you glad to be alive, by the way? Rejoice, in fact, because today is the day that the Lord has made. Just listen to this guy. Listen to that. Oh, it's been a long time. It's been a long time. Mariachi Ando. You're tuned in right now to Paleocrat Diaries. I, of course, am your very humble host, the one and only, the Kaiser, Evening Emperor Jeremiah Bannister. It's just true. It is true. And I'm really grateful for all of you who have tuned in today. We're not going to go back and forth forever and ever and ever with the live chat because we have something really important today. I've decided that between now and the conference in Montana, the Trad Recovery Conference that we're going out there, between now and then, I'm going to do live readings as often as I can. Hopefully every night. I would like to, but sometimes it just doesn't happen that way. However, I'm going to do my best to be timely, right? To be timely. I wasn't timely tonight. I was on some platforms. I said I'd be there at 10:30. And so I wanted to thank everybody for being here. One thing that we will not be doing this evening is engaging with grifters and rando annons. We are not going to be dealing with them. They are contained in their little zoo on Twitter. And so we're going to have a fun time. And I really hope it doesn't turn into that because we're talking about a book about my daughter, our firstborn, who passed away. Her name is Samantha, and she died at age 12. And so it was very difficult dealing with brain cancer and all these different things. And I wrote a book about it. My sister helped me edit this book. And in fact, the one that I've got is just the crustiest version. I carried it with me everywhere for a while until this happened. That right there is my sister's dying autograph. My sister in the book is Aunt Curly. On the cover, she is Phoebe Davis. And she passed away this past year. She passed away after a 6.5-year battle with breast cancer. Working on that book with my sister and my family was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. And it's really difficult when you have 6 kids to create an audiobook unless you have somewhere to go. And so I figured, well, you know what? Why not, at least in the meantime, do some live readings from the book. So if you miss it, you get to catch up and catch up to us or whatever. All the videos are going to be public. They'll be put into a playlist. So do not worry about that. You're welcome to put super chats. Super chats, we'll make sure to go through them. We will answer questions. In fact, if people would like, after each chapter, I'll open it up for just a moment or two. If people have questions, we'll prioritize the super chats, but then we'll try to get to as many as we possibly can. So make sure, if you're interested to know, there's a lot of questions people have about this book. And so if you're one of those and you'd like a little bit deeper dive or you ask for little Easter eggs and stuff, I might give you some. I might give you some. And so I want to thank everybody again. And I'll say this before we move forward. I have to. My sister was awesome. I just have to say it one more time. And I hope you fall in love with every character in the book because they are. They're characters in real life. But she was such a powerful person and she's so tremendously missed. In fact, I think today they had a panahida for her. And I got a video sent to me. I may share it on Telegram and Facebook and Twitter, maybe here as well. And we're going to be sharing other things like the video that I've kept private for a long time. It's about the final days of my daughter's life. And so, let me see if I can. Oh, yeah, I gotta get louder. So, the final hours. And so we'll go ahead and show that. But I just wanted to stress it again. I wanted to stress it again because even her final days were a lot like my daughter's. And I don't want to go into too much detail about it, other than to say that to be there was a saintly experience. To be there when it happened. Not when it happened, but to talk to her beforehand. And I wasn't sure what to say. It was hard to even fathom that she was, in fact, dying. And we drove from Grand Rapids all the way down to Battle Creek. She'd been out to, I think, California, Mexico, and then California because it was getting really bad and it was fluid filling up, and ultimately she's suffocating. And they had to teach my mom this very sterile procedure to try to help to drain, but as you know, they're driving and it couldn't get very far. They had to keep getting out. And it became really clear that unless my sister got home really quickly, that it was likely that she would never be able to say goodbye to her children. And they're amazing kids. And as you'll going through this book and these different topics and stuff, grappling with these questions that are hard. And people made tremendous sacrifices to pay. It's about $30,000 to pay to get an Angel flight, one of those jets. And they got her there in Battle Creek. That's really rare. I don't know anybody other than her who just dropped down in Battle Creek, you know what I mean, at the airport there. And they got her to the house. There's these beautiful pictures online. You can see it. And when it came time for me, the place was packed. It was difficult. The whole thing was difficult. And when it came time for me to go in and talk to her, she had gotten to that place where she couldn't lift up her head very well anymore. And she would try to move her body, but it would just curl back down. And I got on my knees and I looked up at her and I said, I've heard rumor that you helped to edit this life-changing book. And she said, I did. And I said, can I have your signature? Because without you, this book, it would have still been great, you know, in its own way, but it would not be what it is. It's awesome. And it's in large part, I am indebted to my sister. And I just wanted to give her that honor. And for anyone who knows our upbringing and the groups that we kind of followed and listened to growing up, she asked me if I remembered the song about Canaan's land that was sung at the end of every Pauper's Field. Pauper's Field was a local band that we just really loved and stuff. And at the end of all their shows, they would sing it. And I'm not going to sing it right now. I didn't do very good singing it that night. I was like bawling and singing out loud. I was like, why is this guy doing that? It was really awkward. But I'll also share that song because it was perfect. And it hit me later that it was, even the way the words are, that it was for me. And so I just wanted to give her that honor. She helped this book to come alive. All right. So, I need a handkerchief. All right. Here's the book with the crazy cover. Some people say I don't like it. In fact, I think there's like two. I think there's like two people that are like, I don't like that. I don't like that drawing. You know, I drew it. And in fact, it's the only, this is an Easter egg. Down there in this corner is a signature that is only used in this one image. I've never used that signature before. So that's an original one, Maya 23. And then I've got, I'll give you a little hint with this. People may recognize some of this picture. This is an actual picture of my son and I. I used a really cool drawing board for it, and painted over it. For people who have the book, if they look really close and get a magnifying glass, all the monocle men that just happen to read the book, get out your magnifying monocle and look at some of the details. You'll see even my family's car when my brother was in an accident. you'll see that on the mountain. That's where this scarf is coming from. And in here you'll see I'm writing something. But then in that actual picture, I was at a coffee shop here in Grand Rapids, and I was laying out the structure of the book. It was the first day official that I was writing the book. From that point forward, it did not stop. And it took quite a long time. And I had little hiccups here and there, right? But it was the intention was to just, it was resolved. And if someone got close enough, they would realize I did not paint over that. So I painted around all of the words that you could barely see. If you zoomed in really close, you could see it, but that's an actual picture, and I retained the actual words on the picture of even through the painting and stuff. So, and there's a whole bunch more, but I'm not gonna deal with that. So, I broke the book down, and I'll explain this. I broke the book down into sections, but it doesn't begin at the beginning. It actually begins about midway through the book and then harkens back to the beginning, and it will recall and return to this place. This difficulty is tempus fugit, time flies in the fog of war. And for each of these chapters, I tried to be fancy, like you could say it's just in the fog of war or tempus fugit, but I like how it went together. And so it begins there. And from that, it goes to section 1. And I built the sections, and I won't go through all the chapters, but the sections are inspired by a chaplet that you will learn about. It's like a rosary. In fact, it's the little flower rosary. And you'll learn about that in a chapter about Fox, Friends, and Father Sirico. But tonight, we are going to be going through Tempus Fugit in the Fog of War, part 1 of 4, Pillow Blankets with Super Friends, To Dirge and Dare on a Warped Chessboard, and The Fun Spot in Sammy's Garden of Eden. So we're going to have a good time. I hope you're able to stick around as long as you possibly can with us. And I'm going to read the acknowledgments. I have a feeling that there are people who don't realize that the acknowledgments are actually at the back of the book. So all the way in the end. I want to thank all the people who patiently and impatiently waited for me to complete this project. Their support and constant nagging helped me through some terribly tumultuous times. Many of you were quoted in this book, but your words or actions might have been attributed to one of the story's few dozen composite characters. I thank you in advance for recognizing this to be my heartfelt and painstaking effort to incorporate as many people, words, moments, and memories as possible. I'm grateful for the assistance, advice, and encouragement of Diane Baum, Timothy and Whitney Flanders, Phil Gonzalez, Luke Getz, and Chad Lutsky that they provided throughout the process. More than these, I'm thankful for my sister, aka Aunt Curly. Her tea-fueled late-night editing sessions over the phone, finely tuning and toning down the text, made this book what it is today. In fact, here's a free Easter egg. The powerful ending of Zombies and Quiet Zones is almost entirely derived from my sister's written account of her and Nana's memories of that fateful summer morning in July of 2016 when Samantha died. Most of all, I'm forever indebted to my wife and children, Angela, for her patience, love, and long-suffering, and our kids for their kindness, creativity, and camaraderie. I hope and pray that you will always cherish our family's story, that this book will help you to never forget the sister you loved and lost as little children, and that you will forever find in these pages the heart of a father who loves you more than you'll ever know. Lastly, Samantha Lee. You taught me many things, like biding time and the best way to die. You blazed a trail for me, living out what it means to never give up, to keep on smiling, especially when life has us dancing on the edge of an active volcano. And you challenged me to never hate, to dream bigger thoughts, and to live and love with all of my heart into a million pieces. Jeremiah T. Bannister, March 27th, 2023, my 45th birthday. The book is dedicated to my family, past, present, and future. Team Tiny Dancer forever. Tempus Fugit, In the Fog of War, Part 1 of 4. In the Quiet Zone, Summer Solstice 2017. A streetlight shone through the divide of the blinds, and lightning illuminated the surface of Sammy's balloons, which set aglow the haze of smoke that now hovered like a ghost in the room. Papa was home, alone in his office, reading Purgatorio to the sounds of rain and rolling thunder, accompanied by John Frusciante's Song of the Siren spinning slowly on the turntable. He'd been smoking now for hours, or maybe it was weeks, but it felt like he'd been there for months, crying, thinking, plotting and scheming, pondering questions that couldn't be answered, in hopes of help that never came. Life had been wild since they buried their child, a mind-bending mix of delight and despair, and the family spiraled in all sorts of directions, spanning the spectrum from Mama's moderation to the polars of Papa's extremes. The boys were okay, but something was missing, and Teresa was failing in school. Then Papa got injured by visions of grandeur, and Team Tiny Dancer fell apart at the seams. It came like a tidal wave, completely out of the blue, and the family was left to grapple with the aftermath. Unfortunately, Papa wasn't much help. Not now, anyway. For he'd been trapped in a maze of malaise and addiction, always complaining they'd lost their way, but forever unable or unwilling to accept a solution. He used to think it was clever to claim that life was a game of chess, but from his throne in the room where his daughter died, he saw the warped chessboard, scorched by the flames of unholy fire, and all his pieces were falling apart. So Papa struck a match, lit his pipe, then inhaled with all his might, and with his eyes closed, he descended into the dark of the abyss, recalling the days of love and laughter in the life his family lived before the war. And just for clarity, I'll show the balloons later. As we go along, there'll be things that we show, different things we've kept, memorabilia and things like that. And the balloons that are referenced in that are still here. And where I was when that happened was in this room. This is where my daughter died, was in this room. In fact, I'm sitting right now, and I do all of my work from that place where her heart beat its last. Now, Chapter 1, Pillow Blankets with Super Friends. Grand Rapids, Michigan, March 2015. I'll see if I can get, I don't know if I can get up even closer than that. It's the two of us as pillow blankets. It was one of the last couple weeks of her life in that picture. There was a curious cadence in the pitter-patter of Sammy's high tops ascending the stairs, but Papa knew it was her. He heard the school bus barrel down the road, and the laughter of his children echoed through the halls. But, unbeknownst to them, he'd spent the last hour or so playing chess in the attic, patiently biding his time, minute by minute, second after second, until finally Samantha arrived. Psst, Sammy whispered from the stairwell. Whoa! Who is that? Who's there? Sammy covered her mouth, trying her best not to laugh. And in a ridiculous robot voice, she replied, I am Mystery Girl 5000. Wow, Papa said, as he hurried to remove a stack of books from the table. Mystery Girl 5000, huh? Yes, obviously. Honestly, I kind of wondered if this was a trick, but that robot voice is awesome. Probably the best I've ever heard.
Thank you. Beep. I have practiced all week, but now I'm on a secret special mission to see Beep Boop if you Boop Bop would love to have a pillow blankets party with me, Papa.
He sat his elbow on the arm of the chair, and with his chin resting on his palm, he scrunched his eyebrows deep in thought. Well, it is Friday, and pillow blankets is my favorite family tradition. But a sleepover with a robot? I don't know about that. I mean, what would Mama think of me spending the night with some chick named Mystery Girl 5000?
Oh, wait, what? No,
Sammy sputtered, fearing she'd sabotaged her otherwise ingenious scheme.
I mean, Beep, yes, that is true, but I'm not really Beep Boop, a robot.
Papa smiled like a Cheshire cat, and with a voice like the caterpillar from Alice in Wonderland, he asked, then who, may I ask, are you?
Sorry, but I am programmed to make you guess my name or something. Please try hard.
Papa hummed as he rocked in his chair, studiously stroking the wild curls of his long, wavy beard. Well, if I had to guess, I'd say you're, T-Bear. That was Sammy's tongue-tied, thumb-sucking little sister, Teresa, so it wasn't the worst guess in the world, but
negative. That is a very bad guess, actually. Please try again.
So that's what he did. Again, and again, and again. He rattled off almost every name in the house. He even asked if it was Sammy's super fat tabby cat, Lion. But every guess was worse than the last. Come on, Papa, Sammy said, stomping her foot on the stairs. You aren't even trying. Au contraire, mademoiselle. I just needed to figure out if you were a real robot. You broke character twice, though, so now I definitely know who you are. He paused for dramatic effect, imagining the sweat beating up on Sammy's brow. And he held his answer for as long as he could. But just when he thought Sammy would break the silence, he sat up in his chair, and with all the fake confidence he could possibly muster, he declared loud and proud, I knew it was you the whole time. Athanasius. Exterminate! Sammy yelled as she burst into the room. She loved being compared to Mama, and she didn't mind being mistaken for Teresa. At least Teresa was a girl. But her younger brother, Athan, no way Jose. And with her arms crossed in protest, she rolled her eyes. Athan might be my little brother, but he's a big fat brat. Papa raised an eyebrow. He might be your brother? Ha ha, Papa. And nice try, Mr. Lies. But I know for a fact that you knew it was me the whole entire time. I don't know. You are really good at fake robot voices. It's why I've always said you should go to a ventriloquist college when you grow up. Sammy punched his shoulder, then sat on his lap, and with her left arm wrapped around his neck, she leaned in nice and close to his ear, whispering, You are a weirdo! Sammy sat up and rolled her eyes at him, and in a playful, sassy voice, she said, Oh, and just in case you didn't know, ventriloquist colleges are super duper fake news. Then she scowled at him. And you know how much puppets creep me out, so now I'm probably going to have scary dreams all night. Thank you very much. Sammy's scowl did not last long, though, as it was quickly replaced by that look every parent sees when their kid has a trick up their sleeve. And she had something better than a trick. She had Papa in checkmate, and in only 2 moves. Actually, now that you make me think about it, there's really only one cure for those kinds of nightmares. Just one, huh? Papa asked, trying his best to hide the fact that he knew what was coming next. Alrighty then, tell me, what is this one and only cure you speak of? Sammy jumped for joy, and with her left arm raised high overhead, she shouted, It means a pillow blanket sleepover party with Papa. At a hole in the fourth wall. First off, Sammy was lying through her teeth about puppets giving her nightmares. She loved them, even the creepy animatronic ones. Secondly, Sammy would say and do almost anything for a sleepover party with Papa. And that's exactly what pillow blankets was. It all began one fateful night when Sammy was 2 years old. And here's a picture. Come on. There we go. You can see it, yeah. So that's her on top. She's laying on my chest, and on this one, she's, of course, stacking up all these stuffed animals. Taking advantage of me being sleepy like that. Battle Creek, Michigan, circa 2007. Every night, after tucking Sammy in bed, Papa would beeline it to the couch, where he'd fall asleep to the sights and sounds of his all-time favorite cartoon, The Challenge of the Super Friends. But there was just one problem. Sammy loved Super Friends even more than Papa did. And she was a zany little zealot, always watching with the kind of devotion and raw intensity that sports enthusiasts experience when their favorite team plays against their lifelong rivals. She'd fret and fawn over her favorite good guys, heroes like Batman, Superman, Aquaman, and Wonder Woman. And she always bashed and booed those icky, gross villains who were part of the Legion of Doom, with mischief makers like Cheetah, Scarecrow, Lex Luthor, and Bizarro. She even bit her nails when members of the Justice League were in trouble, which, like the Batman TV show from the 1960s, always happens sometime around the midpoint of the show. And like most cartoons from the 70s and 80s, there were always lessons to be learned. No matter how sticky the situations were for Sammy's beloved Super Friends, she loved that the world's most conniving criminals could never prevail over truth, justice, and the American way. Sammy didn't just love Super Friends, though. She was a full-blown fanatic, and this caused all sorts of troubles, especially after bedtime. Fact was, it was the nexus of all her nighttime naughties. She was a persistent little girl, always breaking out of bed, crawling on the carpet, then carefully climbing onto Papa's chest, where she'd fall asleep to the rhythm of Papa's heartbeat. Mama feared it would become a terrible habit, and that is exactly what happened. Papa was a sucker, and he loved spending time with Sammy. So he always concocted some elaborate explanation as to why she just had to stay up with him. It worked often enough, but he didn't always get his way. And when Mama won, she'd make him lay Sammy back down to bed. That was until one late and fateful summer night, when Sammy did something that would change the Bannister family forever. Rather than running through the rigmarole of her regular evening ritual, Sammy simply hopped out of bed, strolled straight through the middle of the room, then stood beside Papa on the couch. In her right hand, she held a musical pillow that played Jesus Loves Me. And in her left hand was a teensy-weensy Technicolor blanket that Mama had knit as a gift for her birthday. "Why are you still awake?" Mama asked. "It's after midnight, Sammy. Go back to bed." Undeterred, Sammy gazed at Papa with her big, blue, precious moments eyes, and with a few flutters of her lashes, she held her hands out to him, and in the most adorable chipmunk voice anyone had ever heard, she asked, "Pillow blankets, Papa?" Mama shook her head. "Well, Jeremiah, your host." And oh, how host he was. For never in human history had a father been so bewitched by his beautiful little girl. And for crying out loud, Papa thought to himself, those eyelashes! Where in the heck did Sammy even get those things anyway? An important question indeed, but Papa had more urgent things to ponder, for he'd fallen face first into an ooey gooey sea of sentimental cuteness, and he was drowning beneath its waves. Resistance proved futile, and from that night on, pillow blankets was the family's most cherished and enshrined family tradition. That was 7 years ago, so Sammy was now 10 years old. And she wasn't the only child anymore. First came Athanasius. Sammy was joking when she called him a big fat brat, but he was a snarky little guy. Ambrose came next, and just like his brother, he was a wee little man, but he was gentle, creative, and with blonde hair and blue eyes, he was the spitting image of his dad. And last but not least, there was Teresa. She was adorable and adventurous, with long brown hair and almond eyes that curled into crescent moons whenever she smiled. Teresa reminded everyone of her half-Asian beauty queen mama. And yet, despite all these additions, the Bannisters remained a family of super friends, happy and hopeful that some things, like pillow blankets, would forever remain the same. But even those things were about to change, and they would begin to change that very night. And you can see this is one of the nights with pillow blankets right here. The whole family is just he eventually just took over, right? And this is, I think, the last picture that we had as a family. We were at the we were at the museum, Grand Rapids, the public museum here. And so we're in front of the river. It's beautiful, nice. There's a cool blue metal bridge in the back. It's great. And so, end of chapter 1. End of chapter 1. All right. And by the way, if you have a question in the chat, you have to tag me. Just add Paleocrat. It's perfectly fine. Don't worry about it. It is good. So I will just move on. Sounds better. This episode's sweet. Yes. All right. Chapter 2. To dirge and dare on a warped chessboard. And it's got a picture. It's the one we used in the image that we had for the thumbnail. We used it on Facebook and elsewhere. Papa read fairy tales to the kids before tucking the younger ones into bed. Sammy grabbed an armful of pillows and carried them up to the attic. There seemed to be a little limp in her stride as she entered the room, but she hadn't complained of any pain, and the pile of pillows in her arms was so big she couldn't even see where she was going. So Papa was surprised when she was able to walk without tripping and falling. "I'm scared you'll be mad at me," Sammy said, as Papa hurried to hide beneath the blankets. They'd barely settled over top of him when Sammy dropped the pillows to the floor. She looked around the room, wondering if he was still downstairs. But then she saw the pillows move. Sammy laughed and shook her head. "That's basically the worst hiding place in the world, Papa." She stood there, thinking back on the hundreds of sleepovers they'd had together and all the silly ways he tried to make her laugh. Memories like those always made her smile, but tonight they made her sad. "I was saying, I don't want you to be mad at me, but I wondered if maybe we could watch something other than Super Friends tonight." It took a few seconds for him to respond, and the silence made her nervous. "Are you being serious right now?" he asked from beneath the blankets. Papa didn't mean to sound sad or upset. It just came out that way. He feared he'd come face to face with that fateful day in which Sammy would come of age and say she's just too big to play his childish games anymore. He knew it would happen sooner or later. It always does. But he always supposed he'd see a sign, or if he was lucky, maybe 2 or 3, and that all the signs would be kind enough to permit him some time to prepare. Peeking his face out from under the blanket, he sighed. "I guess life doesn't always work out that way, huh?" "Life?" "Yeah, I mean, you're 10 years old, Sam, and it's cool you're getting bigger, but I guess it's kind of bittersweet for dads." He lifted the blankets from over his head. And hold on. I gotta turn this down. I don't know why it wasn't turned down. I gotta turn it down. There we go. No audio, no sound. Let's get that out. "I know you'd get too big for my cartoons, but it still sort of bums me out, you know." Sammy frowned, then took hold of Papa's hand. Now that is cuckoo bird nonsense, and you know it too. She struggled to the floor, looking a little like someone with a bad back or bum knee. But with a quick tuck and an awkward roll, she flopped down on the bed of blankets, where she caught her breath, then turned to look at Papa. I'll always love Super Friends, you know. And when I'm married and have a bunch of kids, we'll watch Super Friends every weekend. And I'll make them laugh with stories of all the fun I had growing up. Rolling over on her stomach, she propped herself up on her left elbow. I'm just in the mood for something a little more science-y tonight, that's all. We could watch Cosmos, or maybe Doctor Who. Sammy squinted her eyes, and with puckered lips she replied, Ooh, Neil deGrasse Tyson does have an epic mustache, but we already watched Cosmos, and I promised Paul I'd wait to watch Doctor Who with him. She wasn't wrong. Tyson does have a magnificent stash. And a promise was a promise, especially since it involved the family's favorite friend. So Papa and Sammy surfed online for something fun and science-y to watch. In the end, they settled on a docudrama entitled Darwin's Dangerous Idea. And once they'd gotten settled into the fortress of pillows and blankets, Papa dimmed the lights, Sammy cranked up the volume, and the two of them together pushed play. The cinematography was surprisingly good, and it began with some sweet stories about Darwin and his daughter, Annie. Aw, Sammy said as Lion settled by her side. And just when I thought tonight couldn't get any better. Lion was Sammy's Garfield cat. Super lazy and really fat. He'd been part of the family since Sammy was 7, and she loved him like a brother. He's still alive, by the way. I think he's healthier than ever. He's actually not fat anymore. But there he is. Look at that guy. He's fat. He was a fat self. He needed to join my Fat Shame to Fitness group. With a mouthful of Pop-Tarts, she said, It's his whippy tail, and his purr is like a lullaby promising to keep me safe when I'm asleep. Sammy used her tongue to gather the last bits of icing from her teeth, then smacked her lips. And you know what else, Papa? Me and you are basically the same as Darwin and his daughter. Papa sputtered, splattering sprinkles of Irish stout all over the floor. I hate to break it to you, Sam, but Darwin had a 165 IQ, and Papa's just an average guy. Yeah, that's kind of true. But Darwin loved Annie like crazy, didn't he? And Annie loved to hang out at his job, just like how I go to the radio station or roller rink whenever you go to work. Annie's 10 years old, too, and that's how old I am right now. Papa hummed with a smile on his face. You really are my mini-me, aren't you, baby? Sammy blushed. It's why we're Sammy Maya forever, Papa. Then she hugged his arm and snuggled by his side to finish the movie. The Darwin family's happiness ended abruptly, though. For in a tragic twist of fate, Annie became deathly ill. It came out of nowhere, and Darwin didn't know what to do. In fact, things got so bad so quickly that he was forced to send her out of town for an emergency examination. It was a Hail Mary, but they'd tried everything, and now they were running out of time. And in a heart-wrenching display of fatherly love, Darwin carried his dying daughter, wrapped in a blanket, to a carriage in the street outside their home, where his wife and children kissed Annie and said goodbye. As the carriage slowly began to roll away, Mrs. Darwin assures Annie that she'd come back soon, and Papa will look after you. But Annie only got worse. It was dreadful, and neither Papa nor Sammy knew how things would end. So they held each other's hands, anxiously wondering what would happen next. Have we truly exhausted our options? Darwin pleaded with the doctor. The doctor replied, All one can do is pray. Moments later, Annie's mother, Emma, was shown weeping in a storm, with thunder and lightning flashing and crashing about. She looked to heaven and shouted with all of her might, "Why, God? Why?" It was so painful to watch, and the sorrow in Emma's voice could only mean one thing. Annie had died. Darwin was devastated, wallowing in a valley of tears on the floor. Annie's doctor hovered over him, and with a painful reluctance in his voice, he offered Darwin one final condolence. The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away. Sammy's face was flushed with fear and fury, her fists clenched, white-knuckled with the ache and agony that accompanied defeat and despair. For though Sammy was still quite young, she developed a sagacious sense of death's permanence. And oh, how she hated the Reaper. "Annie's dead, Papa," Sammy cried. "She's really, really dead." Papa wrapped his arms around her, and with their faces pressed deep into each other's shoulder, they wept their broken hearts out. But then came Annie's funeral scene, and they had to see what happened next. Whether fact or fiction, the movie portrayed it as a miserably rainy day. Darwin sat near Annie's deathbed, gazing forlorn out the window as he caressed a silver ribbon once worn by his daughter. But alas, came the time for his family to make their way to the church. So, Darwin gathered his cane and limped alongside his wife and children, all of whom were dressed in the saddest shades of funeral black. Barely a word was said before the bang of the church bells rang through the countryside, and Darwin stood still. There was such sorrow in his eyes as he gazed up at the steeple, and after a moment's pause, he turned his gaze toward the ground. Emma knew what had troubled her husband's heart, for she'd witnessed Darwin wrestle many years with God. Still, with an outstretched hand, she begged him, "Please, Charles, please come in." But Darwin declined, choosing instead to remain outside the church, mourning in the rain, broken and alone. "That would be me," Papa growled, slamming his fist to the ground. "I'd hate anything to do with God for the rest of my life, and there's no way I'd ever go back to church, not after something like that." Papa explained how he agreed with the sentiments summed up by Darwin's biographer, James Moore, who said Annie's death marked the end of Darwin's Christian faith. Darwin simply couldn't believe a good and all-loving God could oversee such a world. And events like these cut against the grain of claims regarding a meaningful and orderly history of mankind. Surely Annie didn't deserve to be punished. So how much less did Annie deserve to die? Such was Darwin's dilemma. "And he's right," Papa thundered. "Annie was just a victim to the vanity of our existence. There's no moral to the story, no grand purpose for the struggle. Everything just runs according to the laws of nature, and nature doesn't care about our feelings." Sammy could feel Papa's anger, but she knew that deep down in his heart of hearts, it wasn't anger so much as fear that compelled him to think and talk that way. So, she listened, silently petting her purring cat. Then, when he finished, she asked, "You really wouldn't go back to church?" "Me? After something like that? Not in a million years." Sammy sniffled, then used her sleeve to wipe her eyes. "I get what you're saying, but would that even include Christmas Eve?" Ah, now that was a cutting question, for Sammy knew a secret. Papa used to be a Christian. He was a Roman Catholic with a radio show when he stopped attending church, and he was a Protestant pastor before that. And he spent nearly a decade debating atheists on radio, TV, blogs, and internet video sites. He'd wrestled with the divine and walked with a spiritual limp ever since. Still, and for reasons he never really talked about, Papa found himself faithfully attending a midnight mass or Eastern Orthodox vigil every Christmas Eve. Sammy liked that about Papa, even if all his atheist friends thought it was weird. Not even on Christmas Eve, he snarled. Never! Never again! Sammy lowered her head. Then she grabbed hold of her right hand, and with a tremor in her voice, she said, I understand, but if something terrible like that ever did happen, then you gotta promise me something. Papa shuddered at the thought. What? If something happened like that? Just promise me, okay? Papa nodded. So Sammy sat up straight, looked deep into his eyes, and said, just promise me you'll never hate. I know it'd be super hard for you, especially because you're bipolar and everything, and nobody likes it when kids die. But most of our friends and family believe in God and go to church, especially on Christmas. And even though you don't agree with them 100%, I'll love them forever with all of my heart no matter what. And with nothing more, Sammy sighed, then rolled over to go to sleep. Thanks a lot, Papa muttered, half jokingly under his breath. He was bewildered by Sammy's bizarre request, and his bones rattled with rage. But that all changed when he became transfixed on a poster that hung on his wall. It was a poster of Sandro Del Prete's warped chessboard, and Papa loved to look at it, especially when he was going through a difficult time. He admired Del Prete's ability to transform altogether ambiguous images into otherwise impossible images. He saw within the pattern a kind of reflection, a representation of the cryptic queries and dreadful hypotheticals that always gnashed and gnawed at his heart. How does a parent survive the death of a child? He thought. I've been to a few of those funerals. They're the saddest scenes in the world. Why would God permit such an evil thing like that to happen anyway? And to innocent children? And where on earth could a family turn for hope in a situation like that? He recoiled at the thought, but he couldn't avoid wondering, if our family ever was forced to bury one of our own, who or what would we become? These were macabre misfortunes to meditate upon, and they started to make him mad, but his worries withered away when he heard Sammy whisper in a soft and tired voice, Papa, when's the next time you DJ at the roller rink? He fluffed Sammy's pillow, then softly ran his fingers through her hair. Tomorrow morning, sweetheart. Then he covered her feet with a colorful comforter and said, It's after midnight, though, so go to bed, baby. In typical Sammy fashion, she yawned, and with a smile on her face, she let out a fading, yay, then closed her eyes and drifted to sleep. And that's the end of chapter 2. So, in the comments, Grover asks, when did Tempest Fugit take place in the timeline? It's in the book itself, it's more toward the end. It's after Sammy had passed away, and we're grappling with it. And so it's like a movie at the beginning. I had to think of it like that. So I was processing that, was saying, a movie that starts off in this dark place, and there's lightning, and there's balloons and smoke all over the place, and this curious kind of eerie and haunting song spinning on the turntable. It's all true. And reading Purgatorio, at that time. And that was 2017. So that had been at least about a year after she passed away. Chapter 3. The Fun Spot in Sammy's Garden of Eden. The next morning, in Byron Center. Oh, yeah, here, yeah, I'll show you. Yeah, it's them all dressed up. They're all in costumes at the Fun Spot. Whether it was the pepperoni pizza, buttery popcorn, and nacho cheese, or the clickety-clack of rollerblades on hardwood floors, or the jingle-jangle of tokens tumbling into video games, the Bannister family loved the Byron Fun Spot. Sure, it was a rinky-dink-a-rink. Okay. Sure, it was a rinky-dink roller rink in the middle of nowhere, USA, But that was part of its charm. And as far as they were concerned, the fun spot was their very own Garden of Eden. A home away from home, where folks were more like family than friends. And of all Sammy's friends at the fun spot, she adored no one more than the tall and pretty teenage girl named Riley. And I don't know if Kelly is still in here, but Kelly Totten, he's Kelly in this chapter. And his daughter, Riley, is in this chapter. That's who we're talking about. So everybody say hi to Kelly. I love you, bro. Wow. Well, Sammy had barely even walked through the door when Riley picked her right up off the floor and twirled her around like a ballet dancer, telling her over and over just how much her friends had missed her. Wow, Sammy said, still dizzy from all this spinning. You missed me that much, huh? Riley rolled her eyes. Obviously, duh. Like you even need to ask. Come on. You've been gone for what, like 4 weeks? Then she unwrapped a lollipop and tossed it in her mouth as she mumbled, Not gonna lie, girl, it sort of feels like you've been gone forever. This was an understatement. Sammy'd been AWOL for a month, and she'd been having excruciating headaches. But 4 weeks felt like a long time, especially for a young girl to have a headache. Papa had also been sick around the same time, and the two of them had the same symptoms, but it was taking Sammy much longer to get better, so people couldn't help but worry. Are you feeling better, though? I mean, you're here, right? So you're at least doing better than before. Sammy shrugged her shoulders, then nervously grabbed her right hand. Yeah, I'm pretty good, I guess, but my head still hurts sometimes, and I'm still super tired for some reason, so I take really long naps almost every day. Sammy scrunched her face like she'd smelled something sour. At least I'm not puking anymore. Well, not that much anyway. Seriously, puking is so gross, and it's weird because my parents thought maybe I just needed some glasses. But the eye doctor said my eyes are perfectly fine. That, however, was not the whole story. It's true that Sammy could see the tiny letters on the chart, but she failed to mention that the optometrist noticed how the pupil in her right eye never dilated, not even when he shined his light in it. I guess he's as confused as we are, but we're talking to my pediatrician tomorrow, so she'll tell me if I need glasses or not. That is really weird, Riley replied. Then, with a flip of a switch, Riley got very serious. She looked to make sure that no one was watching, and using the back of her hand to hide her mouth, she pointed to Papa and his friends and whispered, But nothing is as weird as those dorky dads over there. You can see these are some of the people in the book. It might be a little harder. So, Kelly and Riley. And you've got characters you're going to be introduced to coming up shortly. So I'm seeing it backward. And there I am. All right, there I am at the fun spot. You can see all the roller skates. Catch, Kelly said, as he tossed some Laffy Taffy to Papa. Kelly was Riley's dad, and he was the fun spot manager who hired Papa a few years earlier. They'd known each other for a while, or at least long enough for Kelly to get a handle on Papa's habit of always running late. So how's the best kid skate DJ in GR feeling today? He asked. Papa laughed, but he was nervous, scrambling as fast as he could to prepare his playlist. I don't know, bro. I never met that guy. Dan put his hand on Papa's shoulder. This is Dan in the shirt, and we'll talk about him in a second. Dan put his hand on Papa's shoulder. Yeah, but that's probably because he's always late to work. That's a dirty, rotten rumor, Papa scoffed. And with the lift of his chin, he straightened his bow tie and boasted, It's also rumored he's a bona fide and very dapper gentleman. Oh, brother, Dan scoffed, and Kelly rolled his eyes. All joking aside, Papa was predictably and perpetually late. But so long as he kept doing a great job every session, Kelly let it slide. And Dan was the man. At 6'2" and 300 pounds, he was a huggable, lovable kind of guy. And he always sported a black and white striped shirt. The kind that made people wonder if he was a skate ref. At least until someone said, "Nah, man, that guy? Oh, yeah, I remember. He's that dude who was slipping and falling all over the place, right?" Yeah, Dan was that dude. Or at least he was when he first started skating. That was a few years ago, and Dan had become a greater skater since then. But it was hard to forget a guy the size of a Pittsburgh Steelers lineman flopping and flailing around the ground. It was brutal. Kids snickered every time they saw him lying like a dead bug on the ground. And it went on like that for hours. Then, just when Papa worried that Dan was about to call it quits, he turned on the mic and queued up Survivor's Eye of the Tiger. "This one's for all you first-time skaters out there. I know skating's tough, and it's never fun to fall." With the sound of the song soaring in the background, he looked at Dan and said, "I promise you will get better. You'll probably slip and fall, and you might even get hurt. But that's life, right? All you got to do is give it your best. And like my daughter always says, never give up, no matter what. And always remember, keep on smiling." These three musketeers were true blue buddies, all-weather friends, always waxing nostalgic about the good old days, when songs were great and it was still en vogue to skate. Most of all, they were family men, and there was nothing in the world that made them smile quite like the sight of their wives and children laughing and skating around the rink. Kelly tossed another taffy to Papa and said, "Well, let's hope your being dapper does the trick." Then he walked away and shouted over his shoulder, "Because today is Tiny Tots." Papa froze, shocked that he had forgotten that it was Tiny Tots. After all, it was one thing to be tardy, but it was the epitome of stupidity to be tardy for Tiny Tots. Simply put, Tiny Tots was the Fun Spot's special session for kids and first-time skaters. So the place would be packed with patrons and parties, all of them paying for 5 fantastic family-friendly hours at Fun Spot. 'Twas the kind of crazy known to make grown men cry. Not Papa, though. No, he was made for moments like this. Or so he thought. "Can we have candy?" kids asked repeatedly. "No." "Hey, mister, can you fix the arcade games?" "No." "Yo, DJ, will you please play my very naughty and totally inappropriate song request?" "No!" It went like that for 5 whole hours, which would have been bad enough. But 2 employees called in sick. So Papa had to skip his lunch. And by the time he finally caught a break, the kitchen was closed for the day. He was so upset, and he feared he'd snap and lose his mind. But all those frustrations faded away every time he saw Sammy skating. Her clothes were a wild array of vibrant colors, and the lights sparkled like stars across the jewelry on her arms and neck. She looked like Punky Brewster, or better yet, a celestial Cyndi Lauper, and today she wore some new blue blades with a golden phoenix emblazoned on the side. Sammy soared wild and free. She was a diva, true to form, her every move in harmony with the melody of the music, swinging and swaying her arms while singing along with all her favorite songs. She was beautiful to behold, with energy and elegance, gliding like a ghost across the gleaming maple floor. But she was tenacious too, especially at the end of the day when, like now, Kelly and Dan placed orange cones around the center of the rink, which could only mean one thing. Papa was about to say, "It's time for Fast Skate." Fast Skate was Sammy's favorite, and she wasn't alone. True, most kids love games like Limbo, Dead Bug, and Freeze Tag, especially when you get them screaming at the top of their lungs for candy. But Fast Skate, that was the barn burner. Even the audience got into the action, kicking and shouting as they fought for seats along the wall, where they would cheer for their favorite in-house skaters. This was no kiddie race either. It was the big shebang. Risky business reserved for the most hardcore skaters at the rink, the real creme de la creme of the crop. With only seconds to spare, Sammy got in starting position, and with a rat-a-tap-tap of her wheels to the floor, the rink transformed into an arena with a brilliant rainbow road, every plank aglow with colors spanning the spectrum, and each of them in sync with the sound of the song. Then, with Dan's checkered flag raised high, Kelly nodded to Papa, who smiled at the skaters waiting for the whistle, then thundered into the microphone, "Ready, set, go!" The fun spot rocked and roared with excitement, and the building shook to its foundations when the audience leapt to its feet. Mama worried, though, when she noticed that Sammy was the only girl in the race. "It's okay," Teresa assured her. "Sammy beats boys all the time." "Yeah, Mama," Ambrose said. "Sammy's fast like Speedy Gonzales." "Speedy Gonzales?" Athens scoffed. "More like the DeLorean from Back to the Future." And he wasn't kidding. Sammy flew like a phoenix, bright as lightning, and leaving tracks of fire flickering in the trails set ablaze in her wake. It was all so surreal. And yet it was here that something unsettling first appeared. Papa had watched Sammy skate hundreds of times. And like most rollerbladers, she had a certain style. Arms held low, bent in at the elbow, always swinging in tandem with the cadence of her skates. He wondered then why Sammy now raised her right arm high overhead around the turns, or why her right hand was curled up in a funky kind of fist, all bent and turned down at the wrist. It reminded him of something he'd seen many years before when a baby bird fell from its nest above the porch. The bird's bones were badly broken, and its little wing was withered from the fall, leaving it helpless and entirely unable to fly. The family had a funeral for it, as well as for its brothers and sisters, with 5 rocks being placed on their porch to honor their memory. And that is the picture from the funeral. And this is an actual disco ball from the fun spot. We got a picture of that. But quite unlike the baby bird, Sammy was flying just fine, and her funny form didn't slow her down one bit. For by the midpoint of the race, Sammy had flown from 5th to 4th, from 4th to 3rd, and now a split second behind the boy in first place. That was until click, clack, crack. The crowd gasped when Sammy's right leg wobbled and slipped out from beneath her, which caused her to tumble face first to the floor. She was so confused, and she thought she'd lost one of her wheels, but everything was fine. Everything except the fact that she was now back in last place. Determined to win, she sprang to her feet. Then, click, clack, crack, she fell again, this time to her back. Tears streamed down her cheeks, though less from pain than sorrow and disappointment. And each time a tear dropped to the floor, a plank of Sammy's rainbow road lost its glow. Everything in Sammy's sight was a blur of shape and color, tracers in a world now locked in slow motion. Even the cheers collapsed into a cacophony of eerie echoes, plaintive and hollow, and all of them fading so fast. Sammy wiped her eyes, and looking up at the reflection in the disco ball gleaming and glimmering overhead, wherein she witnessed the world revolving round about her, and the disintegration of her dreamlike rainbow road. Sammy struggled to climb to her knees, and for a moment she feared she was unable to stand. So she reached her hand toward the DJ booth and cried out in the loudest voice her family had ever heard, "Papa, help me!" He leapt from his chair and into the air over the barrier. But before his feet even hit the floor, Sammy shook her head, and with eyes as bright as a million suns, she yelled for him to stop. Everything inside of him wanted to help her, but Papa knew what she was thinking, and it was exactly what she needed to do. So he waited, quietly listening for that grit of her teeth and the growling sound of grinding gears as the world between her ears returned to a shared sense of space and time. "Get up," Papa whispered under his breath. Then he looked into Sammy's bright blue eyes, pointed his finger toward the finish line, and shouted, "Don't you dare give up, Samantha Lee. Never, ever give up." The building shook like an earthquake when Sammy stood to her feet, and the brilliant lights of Sammy's Rainbow Road now shined with an almost otherworldly glow. "You can do it," Riley cheered, and the children chanted, "Go, Sammy, go!" Boom! Sammy blasted off like a fighter jet, and she must have felt like Goku from Dragon Ball Z, because her power level was way over 9,000. The girl was full-blown supersonic, winding and weaving at breakneck speeds past all the other racers, who tumbled left and right and all around, being thrown to the ground by the sheer force of her velocity. She'd broken the sound barrier, so these kids didn't know what hit them. Not until moments later, the sound of her giggle finally reached their ears. And with sheets of sparkling light showering 10 feet high in her wake, Sammy was back, now skating neck and neck with a tall teenage boy. But time was ticking, and Dan raised his checkered flag, so she squinted her eyes and pressed her lips tight, taking that final turn lower than any turn she'd ever taken, so low that her long flowing hair brushed gently against the ground. And now, facing that final stretch, Sammy glanced at the boy, and with a twinkle in her eye, she winked at him, then gave it all she had, pouring herself out, every drip of every drop, until at last Dan shouted, "First place!" The ending was picture perfect, and that rinky-dink roller rink in Nowhere, USA roared with an applause that was heard for miles and miles away. For it was on that day that Sammy did what no one thought was possible, finishing a mere nanosecond behind the teenage boy in first place. Ambrose pushed his way through the crowd, then hugged his sister with all of his might. "It was like the grand finale of everyone's favorite movie," he exclaimed. "And you were definitely the superstar of the show," Teresa said. "Really?" Sammy replied, still trying her best to catch her breath. Then she laughed. "You guys know I lost, right?" Athens scoffed and rolled his eyes. "Whatever, Sam. Everyone knows you would have won if you didn't fall down." And with a menacing glare at the teenage boy who won, Athens slapped his fist and snarled under his breath, "You'll get him next time, Sammy. Trust me." One hour later, back at home. After work, Papa went to the attic and chowed down a fistful of Cheez-It crackers. And while he sat there thinking back to the baby bird's broken wing and the shock of Sammy falling during Fastgate, he heard once again that curious cadence and the sound of Sammy's shoes on the stairs. "Speak of the devil," Papa said as Sammy limped into the room. "I just want to tell you how much I love you before I go to bed." "You love me, huh?" Sammy sat on his lap, then grabbed her right wrist and lifted both hands over his head. With her fingers interlocked around the back of his neck, she cracked a half smile, and with a lyrical and almost sing-song voice, she said, "I love you, Papa, with all of my heart, into a million pieces." "Then you gotta be real with me. I hate saying this, but I feel like you're hiding something from me, and it's kind of messed up, Sam." Sammy's eyes shot toward the floor, and she bit her bottom lip. Nothing. Nothing is the matter. I guess I just fell, that's all." "Then I guess you just fell twice, Sam. And I guess nothing made you cry for help either, right? Everyone in the rink heard you say it. And now you're walking kind of funny." "Yeah, well, maybe I'm walking funny because I fell. I bet you never thought about that." Papa raised his hands in self-defense. "Whoa, little horsey. You gotta slow up on that. And don't be mad at me for being worried. I'm your dad, and I love you like crazy. But I'd be lying straight to your face if I said I didn't feel like you were hiding something from me." Sammy sighed. I know. And you aren't entirely wrong. I'm sorry too, because I don't want you to be mad at me. This is the only time I've ever fallen down that way, though. And it happened during Fastgate, so I think I just got really confused. She reached with her right hand for a chess piece on the floor, but she struggled to pick it up, so she switched to her left, then placed the white queen on her rightful square. I wish I knew what was really going on, she said, still staring at the board. At least then I'd stop being all scared and confused. Sammy tried being sly, so subtle and nonchalant, but Papa saw what she had done. He knew it was the same right hand that he'd seen earlier that day, all curled up like a broken wing. He reached out to grab hold of it, but Sammy pulled away just as his fingers grazed across the skin of her wrist. Then, in an obvious attempt to change the subject, Sammy swiveled on his knee and said, "Oh my gosh, I am such a dork. I totally wanted to show you something I learned to do. You won't believe how awesome it is either, so I just know you'll be happy and proud of me when you see it." Papa laughed and shook his head. "You can't even fathom how proud I am of you, Samantha." Then he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You make me proud in a million different ways every single day. And you can bet I'll be proud of you forever." Rarely had a truer truth been spoken. And yet nothing in all the world could have prepared Papa's heart for the terrible secret that Samantha Lee was about to confess. And that's the end of chapter 3. And so I wanted to thank everybody. If you guys want me to read one more, I'll read. I'm up for reading this 4th chapter because it's kind of the last in a series, and I kind of feel that it's important. Maybe, yeah. And then we'll. And this is a short one. This is like 2.5 pages. Because then we can start tomorrow where we're in the hospital, right? That's kind of a major shift in the story because, we go from the normal life that we had to all of a sudden a very major change. And so I'll do the short transitional chapter now. Okay. Thank you, by the way. And if you'd like to do super chats, you're more than welcome to. You don't have to, obviously. This is free, and we'll be doing this every night until we're done with the book. That's my goal anyway, right? Chapter 4, Monsters Thrive in Lies of Hidden Hands. And I did it again, Monsters Thrive, right? And then in brackets, in Lies of Hidden Hands. Moments later in the attic. And this is actually, in real life, this is the second to last picture that we took of her before the hospital. This is, I think, the night before. If you were to get closer, you would be seeing that there's like kind of down a little bit, but it looked like a smirk. It didn't look like anything weird. Nobody mentioned it. But it was one of those things that once you go back and you know what's going on, you start to see pictures and stuff or start to see evidences and symptoms. And that's a trouble all of its own that is talked about later in the book when we have to go through her stuff. Moments later in the attic, Sammy hopped off Papa's lap, then limped to the shelf where he kept his fancy pens and leather journals. "You won't believe how awesome this is," she said, as she selected what she knew to be his favorite diary. She sat across from him at the table, and with the pen cap between her teeth, she mumbled, "Look, Papa, I learned to write with my left hand." Her writing was slow but smooth, and her penmanship was crisp and concise, even elegant, in both cursive and in print. "Dang, girl, that's amazing," Papa exclaimed as he examined the page. Overflowing with pride, Sammy closed her eyes and smiled like a girl atop the world. "I worked so hard on that, Papa. It took me 2 whole weeks to do. And if you're proud of me, then that means my teacher will be proud of me again, and he won't be sad at me anymore." "Pfft, you're the teacher's pet, Sam. Seriously, when has Mr. Levi ever been mad or sad at you?" No sooner has he said those words than a sudden and most dreadful sort of sadness cast its spell over Sammy. It looked like the weight of the world was on her shoulders, and the silence in the room was broken only by the silent screams of her soft and subtle sighs. "I'm just afraid you're going to be surprised, Papa." Papa was confused. "Why would you ever be afraid to surprise me?" Sammy squeezed tighter and tighter around her wrist. "I want to tell you, but I'm really scared you're just going to be mad at me." "I ain't mad yet," Papa laughed anxiously, "but I'll be ticked if you don't tell me what the heck's going on." There was a tumultuous mix of fear and anger in his voice, and his eyes looked strange from the storm that was building deep inside. "You gotta level with me, Sam. Why do you think your teacher isn't proud of you anymore? And why do you think I'll be mad at your surprise? And what the heck does any of this have to do with you learning to write with your left hand?" Sammy's chin dropped down to her chest, and her eyes vanished in the shadows from the drapes of hair that hung in front of her face. "My teacher said my writing was sloppy, and he told me I should slow down. But I know that wasn't the problem because even when I did what he told me to do, I still couldn't get the work turned in on time, and that made him even sadder about me." Sammy paused for a second, then shrugged her shoulders. "I guess I just thought that if I could learn to write left-handed, then maybe all my problems would disappear." Papa didn't reply right away, but she knew he was listening. She saw his jaw tighten as he was tossed to and fro in a torrent of fear and fury. And it was there that with Papa ensnared like a lamb in that thicket of logic and emotion, betwixt the myriad reasons a father has for fighting or flying away, that Sammy finally told him the truth. "I'm so sorry, Papa, but my hand just doesn't work anymore." "What do you mean it doesn't work anymore?" Every one of his words were more intense than the last, and it frightened her a little. But Sammy knew she had lied to him, and she had a feeling that things would only get worse, much worse from here. It felt so good, though, for her to finally be honest, to no longer suffer in the silence and solitude of deceit. And she knew that was true, even if she meant she'd have to break Papa's heart. "I mean, I haven't written right-handed for 2 weeks." "No!" Papa growled as he raised his fist. Bam! The chessboard bounced high off the table, and chess pieces flew all over the room. Sammy watched them tumble, and she gazed down at a king that had fallen by her feet. "Please don't hate me," she begged. "My teacher said my new writing looks really good, and dang it, Samantha Lee, he's not your dad. I am." It sounded so preposterous, and he wondered if it was a prank. So he grabbed a pen and he placed it on the table, demanding that Sammy show him how she could still write with her right hand. She grabbed the pen with her left hand, using it to place it in her right. But she held it like people hold darts or paper airplanes. He thought she was putting on an act, especially after he saw the way she wrote. "You gotta be freaking kidding me," he snarled as he snatched the paper off the table. "There's no way you're being serious. Look at this crap. It's nothing but chicken scratches. This is obviously a joke, Sam, and it's not very funny." He was right. She hadn't written a single legible word. He was frantic now, wildly searching through all of his pockets. When he found his wallet, he pulled out an old and wrinkled piece of paper, tattered and torn from years of wear and tear. "Do you recognize this?" he asked. And this is what it was. And the onomatopoeia, all the onomatopoeia in the book has different kind of fonts that we thought matched very well. So it has kind of a comic book, lighthearted feel, even in dreadful parts of it. Sammy nodded. Yes, Papa. It's the letter I wrote that told you how proud I am of stuff you do, and how you should never give up on your dreams. I didn't even know you still had that. Of course I do. I've carried it in my wallet for years. He slid the letter across the table. Now look at it, Sam. Look good too, because that is your handwriting. And with his finger pressed hard against the paper, he squinted his eyes, and in a very slow, demanding voice, he commanded her to write one more time. Sammy fought like mad to hide her fear. But her fingers had taken on a life of their own, and she knew they couldn't write anymore. She bit her lip and raised her chin, determined to do her best, but the hair fell away from her face. And now, with her eyes laid bare under the tungsten light, Papa saw tiny tears streaming down her cheeks. They were tender, and they twinkled in the light, but did they tell the truth? This is when she was younger, but I wanted people to be able to look into her eyes, and so I included that. Papa looked into her eyes, as he was sure they never lied, and much to his surprise, they were sad, and they shimmered with sincerity. Worst of all, they were scared. He'd been so confused. Confused about the eye that wouldn't dilate, the curious cadence in her shoes as she limped up the stairs, and the broken wing of the baby bird as she flew around the turns. None of it made sense, and had been driving him mad. But now, in the madness of this moment, Papa stumbled upon the source of Sammy's troubles, and he found it in a teardrop dangling on the end of her chin. It wiggled and wobbled as it hung on for dear life, but nothing could withstand the gravity of the situation, tugging, pulling, dragging it closer to the edge. Then he exhaled, and his breath traveled across the table, nudging the tear just enough to make it fall from Sammy's chin. And as it fell, Papa's eyes grew wide with terror. For there, in the twinkle of that tiny tear, he beheld a terrible triad, the deadliest of all life's cruelest constellations. Bang! Sammy's pen fell straight into the puddled remains of the tear that dropped from her chin. And with her face buried into her hands, she wept and cried aloud, "It's my fault. This is all my fault." She begged him to forgive all those things she'd done, and all those things she failed to do. And she admitted that she was afraid. "But most of all, I just love you, Papa, and I promise I'll never lie to you or to anyone ever again." Papa knew an act of contrition when he heard one, and he wished he had the power to absolve, but all he could offer was his heart. He reached over the chessboard to hold Sammy's hands, and in a soft and sympathetic voice he said, "Look, I don't know what's going on, but whatever it is, we can..." Gasp! Sammy saw the whites of his eyes when, for the very first time, Papa felt what she was hiding. Her hand felt boneless, entirely limp, and it would have felt completely lifeless if not for the twitch of her wrist and the spasms of her fingers, little spasms that caused her hand to curl in a fist. "Do you know what's wrong with me?" Sammy whimpered. Papa just sat there, staring at her hand. He wished he hadn't doubted her, and he regretted making her right. But he hated himself most for having gotten mad. He slowly raised his head, and with calming breaths between his words, he said, "Go downstairs. Tell Mama to get the kids ready. We gotta go." "But what should I tell? What should I say if Mama asks where we're going?" "Tell her to call Paul," he continued undisturbed. "We gotta go to the hospital." "The hospital? Sammy gasped. "If you know what's the matter with me, will you please just tell me?" But Papa kept talking in that distant, droning tone. "Don't stop. Don't fight. Don't eat or go to the bathroom. Just go straight to Mama and tell her to call Paul." Sammy limped as she rushed to leave the room, and with the fading sound of that curious cadence from her shoes on the stairs, Papa sat back in his chair, and with water welling up in his eyes, he recalled that terrible triad in Sammy's tear. Right leg, right eye, right hand. It was a monster, and it was in the left side of Sammy's brain. I said I would only read that one. I'm going to read one more. And it's another, it's not very long. But Kelly's in here, and so this is a Easter egg. And by the way, Grover, yes, I was a practicing Catholic at some point since Sammy's birth. I was a pastor and I converted. And so that was in Christmas Eve of 2006 was when I made the decision. I wrote a blog about it. I was a kind of a mid-level blog guy, right? And doing apologetics and stuff and all that. And I'd been debating Catholics for over a year. And it was a really hard time. And I'll talk about that in different places. But yes, we were Catholic for it was about 4 years, and I was a sedevacantist for 1. And then we walked away and stopped going, and then eventually became just open, ardent atheist people. Chapter 5. Roses and Redwoods. Day 1 at Helen DeVos. And the reason why I want to include it is because it was after hours. And so the kind of, it is a good transition one. It's better than the other one. Okay? I think. For a transition one. We'll see. You decide yourself. Let me know. Yeah. Sammy had never been inside of Helen DeVos Children's Hospital, but she always loved the way it looked. Oh, and real quick, I had a picture. I didn't show anybody. At the end of the chapter where the fun spot, at the end, I have a picture there of the room where she told me the truth. So you can see the actual office. You can see the posters and the references to Batman and Marilyn Monroe that happened later and stuff like that. And Doctor Who. Day 1 at Helen DeVos. Sammy never been inside Helen DeVos Children's Hospital, but she always loved the way it looked, especially at sunset. It was huge, standing over 10 stories tall, and the whole building looked like it was made of shiny blue mirrors, allowing people to see the city in its reflection as they passed by. And best of all, that's where Paul worked. Paul was all sorts of wild and zany, a real child at heart. And like the Bannisters, he loved TV shows like Doctor Who and Sherlock. Plus, Paul played video games, and he knew a lot about Pokemon. So life was endless fun when Paul was around. But he was a worrywurm too. So when the family pulled into the parking lot, they found him pacing and puffing like a chimney on his e-cig. "What's going on? Is Sammy okay? Is there anything I can..." "Yo, bro!" Papa laughed. "What?" Paul replied. Papa put his hand on Paul's shoulder, and with a cool and calming smile, he said, "I just want to say I love you, bro." It was a blatant attempt to tranquilize Paul, even just to stop his rambling, but it worked. Paul took a huge, calming breath. Okie dokie, so now that we've got all that craziness out of the way, will someone please tell me what the heck is going on? Mama helped Sammy out from the car and sat her down in a wheelchair outside the emergency room. "We just need some help with the kids, just in case Sammy has to spend the night." "It shouldn't be hard," Papa said. "They've been crazy busy all day, so if you feed them, they'll probably pass out on their own. especially if you read a story, Teresa said as she yawned and wiped her eyes. It just depends on what the doctors find, Mama said. But there's a chance they'll keep her overnight, and if they do, we'll need more help. Paul watched with Papa and Mama as they wheeled Sammy toward the door. Dude, you know I'll do anything for your family. All you gotta do is ask. Then you better record the new episode of Doctor Who, Sammy shouted from over her shoulder. We were supposed to watch that tonight, remember? How could I forget? Paul yelled back at her. And with a cross over his heart, he promised he wouldn't watch it until Sammy got home. Then he hugged Papa goodbye and drove the kids back home. Inside, nurses hurried to take Sammy's vitals. Then they placed her on a hospital bed and rushed her toward the MRI, which was in a winding maze of dark hallways deep within the underbelly of the hospital. It feels like a dungeon down here, Sammy whispered to Mama. All quiet and creepy. Not everything was scary, though. Sammy saw motivational messages in the halls, playful paintings of funny fish swimming on the walls, and there were huge multicolored tubes bustling with bubbles near the service desk. Still, it was kind of creepy, at least at night and in the dark. So everyone was relieved when Sammy was finally assigned a room. But then, just when they were settling in, Mama got a message from one of Sammy's friends. It's Gladys, she said as she typed her reply. Her family drove 30 minutes to visit, and they even brought you a present. Mama paused, and in a nervous, drawn-out voice she said, But what? Sammy asked. But visiting hours are over. I guess security told them that one of us has to go to the front lobby if we want to pick up your present. Then, with the kind of precision that comes only with years of practice, Mama and Sammy turned their heads toward Papa at the exact same time. Papa looked around the room, then pointed to himself. Who, me? Yeah, right. Like I'm going to retrace my steps through all those creepy halls. And what's up with that whole head turn at the same time voodoo? Are you two practicing that maneuver behind my back or what? Stop being such a fraidy cat, Sammy said. Papa did not like this at all. But that's exactly what he was, a fraidy cat. He feared things like the dark, and lightning, and spiders, and tornadoes, and deep water, and of being lost and alone. And being alone was the worst of them all. He hated being alone, especially in the dark. It was ridiculous, but whenever he found himself spending the night alone in the house, he'd open every closet, check behind all the curtains, and turn on every light in every room just to make sure no one else was there. Then, at bedtime, he'd play a G-rated movie or a cartoon just so he could sleep. Yeah, you're totally a fraidy cat, Mom said, while playfully petting his head. You two are so rude. Pretty please, Papa, Sammy begged with puppy dog eyes. No way, Jose. Not after you guys just made fun of me. Papa thought he'd thrown down the gauntlet, but he ought to have known better, since Sammy was sure to wage an all-out war. In the arms race between little girls and their dads, the dads are always one step behind, and Sammy knew that. But she also knew that Papa would do almost anything not to leave her side. So she just cut to the chase and, unleashing the biggest guns in her arsenal, she fluttered her extra long lashes and said, But you know I love you so much. Her pouty lip was unreal, and there was a cute little whimper in her voice. But it's what she said next that was the nail in his coffin. You know I would, Papa, if I could. Mama didn't need to look up from her knitting to see that Papa was bleeding out all over the place. He pretended to be terribly unimpressed, but there was no coming back from that. Sammy went for the jugular, and all that was left for Papa to do was stand up and head out the door. As he was leaving, Papa turned around, and with a smirk on his face, he winked and said, Honestly, Sam, you had me at pretty please. The lobby was dark, lit only by those bubbling multicolored tubes, and the only sound around was that of a security guard who was laughing with a woman at the front desk. But even if the place was pitch black and packed with people, it wouldn't have been hard to know that Gladys was around. And this is her friend. And by the way, they graduated last year. I mean, this is the age that they would be now, right? This would be, I think, their first year in college, I think, if I'm remembering. It never was. A tall, Native American girl with an award-winning smile and the most boisterous laugh in town. Gladys was one of a kind. She always managed to find herself at the center of attention, or, if she was lucky, right smack dab in the middle of some good old-fashioned mischief. Hey, Mr. B. Hey, Mr. B, she said as she stood from her seat. Is Sammy okay? Papa waved for her to sit down, then sat across from her at the table. That's what we're here to find out. But we won't know anything until at least tomorrow morning. Ugh! Why does everything have to wait till tomorrow? Gladys cast a grumpy glance toward the security guard, then made an icky face and stuck her tongue out at him. Only family after 10 p.m. That security guard is such a rude jerk. A rascally smile crept across her face. You know, you could always tell them I'm your other daughter. Papa waved to her family, who were sitting on a couch about 20 feet away. I'm pretty sure the security guard figured out who your parents are. Grrr! Gladys groaned as she dropped her head to the table. Oh yeah, sorry. I guess I forgot just how not fun you are, Mr. B. She raised her head, and without saying a word, she reached her hand into a decorative bag on the floor by her feet. I bought it from a store on the way here. I even paid for it with my own money. It was a pinkish red rose, still in maturation, and it was bundled in baby's breath. Sammy loved flowers, and she is as beautiful as a rose to me. Her voice cracked from getting all choked up. It's Sammy's favorite color, too, so I thought it was perfect. Gladys looked so helpless and sad. And Papa knew she was scared for her BFF, so he tried his best to comfort her. Sammy loves this color, Gladys. It's perfect. Then he chuckled. You know, it always reminds me of Sam's cheeks whenever you make her laugh. I thought the same thing, Gladys said. The thought made her laugh. A little, but it didn't last long. I need to go back home, Mr. B. But I need to tell you something first, and you have to promise to tell Samantha. I promise, he replied, his finger raised in Scout's honor. No, Mr. B, I know I can joke around a lot, but I'm really serious right now. Tears welled up in her dark brown eyes, and her emotions made it hard for her to talk. Sammy's my best friend in all the world, and I'm just scared, you know, and I just hope she's going to be okay. She used her sleeve to wipe tears from her face, then looked at the moon shining brightly through the window. So, well, will you just tell her that no matter what happens, I promise with all my heart to always love her, and that I'll always be her friend? Papa nodded. Then the two of them stood to their feet, and after a tearful hug, he waved and said goodbye to Gladys and her family. He was almost to the exit when Gladys turned around and shouted, I know you're scared too, but you're Sammy's dad, and she loves you and the family like crazy, so you gotta be like a redwood tree, 'cause they're strong and tall. It's what your family wants to see, and it's what Sammy needs. You're more than a friend, Gladys, Papa shouted back. You're Ohana. Gladys smiled. Ohana forever, Mr. B. Walking back toward that dark and dreary hallway, Papa stumbled upon a sign, and the headline grabbed his attention. It read, U.S. News and World Report ranks Helen DeVos Children's Hospital in 3 specialties. And I want you to see that I'm not joking. It's a Facebook post. And it's something I grappled with because you can be in a situation that's so terrible and it's screaming in your face and you still don't know because it's so dreadful and so horrific to even imagine for a second that you shut it out. Then his eyes scrolled to the bottom of the sign where he saw 3 words: urology, nephrology, and cancer. That third one hit him hard, and he shuddered at the thought. He'd never met a kid with childhood cancer before, and he couldn't even imagine what life would be like for families that had to deal with that. But he'd seen them on TV, and the commercials always made him cry. That'd be the scariest thing in all the world, he thought. Wiping his head, he let out a sigh of relief and said, I bet all those families are so grateful to have a hospital like Helen DeVos right here in town. With those thoughts in mind, Papa closed his eyes, then smelled the rose one last time, and with a smile in his heart, he bravely re-entered the dark, labyrinthian halls that would lead him back to his daughter. And the next chapter will be called Vitals, Vitals, Everything is Vital, and it's one of my favorite pictures ever. Her face, she is not happy. I'm sorry about all the screaming into the mic. Yeah, she's not happy about Vitals, Vitals, Everything is Vital. It's one of my favorite opening scenes. The next couple chapters, the way that they open, those are some of my favorite openings in them. And so I hope that you have enjoyed this. I hope that it's something that has blessed you and that it gives you an extra reason to tell your loved ones that you're sorry and that you will do better in your life, that you have to give it all you've got because we only live one time. And you want to be the kind of person that if life is taken from you too soon, or if you're at the end of being 140 years old, you're anxious, that no matter which way it goes, no matter which, that if you had the opportunity, you could look over everything and say that you were proud to have done what you had done, to have lived the way you lived and loved the way you loved, and to be surrounded by people who have been impacted by your existence in their lives. So I'll leave it at that. Did you ever inquire about extreme unction at all at that point? You're going to find out in the chapter Fox, Friends, and Father Srico. That's actually, I think that's 2 chapters from now. I'll read them tomorrow. So I'll read it tomorrow. So that question will be answered. It'll be answered, so you'll see it. But I want to thank everybody. And actually, wait a second. I never even did this page right here. I should do this page next time. Because I would be able, let's see if I can do this. Look at that. Dude, I could just do that next time. And it'll be, we'll have our, what, the Blazes? Oh, I'm at the bottom. Okay, I got you. I'm like, something's wrong, boys. Something is wrong. So yeah, it's at the top. We're way down here. So we just finished Roses and Redwoods. Vitals, Vitals, Everything is Vital is what we will read next time. And I'll put it on the screen like this. Would you like that? I hope so. I hope that is something that you would love to do. All right. Let's No. Oh no. Oh, now I can't even hear the music in the background. That is a bummer. Not entirely sure why in the world that has happened. We're going to go do this. Watch this. Watch this. Monitor and output. Monitor off. Monitor and output. Close. Dude, it's not doing it. I'm grateful. I'm super, super duper grateful that you have come to join this. And we have up here Telegram channels. You have to go and you can find the Telegram chat. And in the description, I'll have that in the description below. I shared it elsewhere. I think yesterday's video or a couple days ago that was in there. And we have a prayer chain if you'd like to offer any prayers. In fact, between now and when we head off to Notre Dame and St. Louis and making our way to the keynote in Montana, we're going to be doing a whole bunch of this. So it's going to be, there's going to be other things that we're going to do in between that time in relation to the book and in relation, so the story and everything else is going to be great. And we'll keep you abreast of any kind of book signings that we have and stuff like that. We'll keep you entirely up to date. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. I am grateful. I'm grateful for all of you. And please share this book. I'm giving so much away for free because I didn't ask for this and what was given to me to be a caretaker of her estate, the estate of Princess Sammy, that it would forever remain wonderful and bright. And so just as she would, and we'll close out every time this way, never give up, keep on smiling, and memento mori.